Welcome to Husband Talking. Explore riveting tales of infidelity with us. Please subscribe and like to stay updated. Let's begin.
I never realized how arrogant, delusional, and narcissistic my wife, Amelia, was. In her mind, she somehow turned her infidelities into some kind of virtue. These words echoed in my mind as I faced the inconceivable reality of betrayal. The confrontation was intense. She was breathing heavily and passionately, her face and chest flushed, with a fire in her eyes, a look that made me challenge everything and quit. This story unfolds the journey of love, deception, and the quest for truth amidst the ruins of what I once believed was perfect. It all started in a deserted lot in Brookdale on a chilly, dreary November day. My sight moved across the surrounding landscape, revealing remnants of trees, soot-covered walls, and scattered shards of shattered glass and rubbish thrown across the plot by the unrelenting wind. This sight felt like a metaphor for my life, an empty burnout shell filled with loneliness and hatred. As I stood there contemplating what to do next, my attention was pulled to Sophia, whom I had met at a charity event a few weeks prior. My cousin, Jacob, invited me to this event and suggested I use it to increase my network of business opportunities. The evening turned out to be dull, but Sophia captured my attention with her grace and confidence. We spent the evening in delightful conversation, and I decided to invite her to dinner. Our meeting was full of common interests, and I was soon drawn to her. We dated for several months until our affection faded. Despite my hesitation and uncertainty, Sophia took the lead one evening, demonstrating that desire is not exclusive to men. She offered me a ride that could have formed a mechanical bull racing team, and by the end, I was extremely exhausted. It was the most fun thing I'd done in my life. From that point forward, intimacy in our relationship grew more frequent and easy. We were living together within a few months of meeting, and just over a year later we got married. We moved into a 4-bedroom house in a wonderful tree-filled neighborhood, did some landscaping, acquired a dog, and life was great. Almost every aspect of marriage suited me. I was unwilling to recognize the end of my loneliness, the unconditional emotional support, the physical satisfaction from meaningful sex, and having someone to love and adore. It was everything I desired and more. Of course, there were some issues. I was always a little busy at work, so Sophia was irritated by my availability, and there were probably a few more behaviors she disliked. Naturally, something angered me too. Perhaps the most difficult challenge was that we had to interact with her family far more than I would have liked. Don't get me wrong, I didn't detest her family. They were good, decent folks with generally courteous demeanors and no particularly disagreeable personality features, but I didn't want to spend too much time with them. Her parents were an outgoing, cheerful pair who seemed to like me, yet they lectured us on how we should live and put a lot of pressure on us to have children. But we never spent enough time together for it to bother me, so it wasn't a big deal. Her younger sister, Olivia, and her husband were a little more difficult for me. Olivia was a shorter and slightly rounder counterpart of Sophia. She dressed and talked like Sophia, and when Sophia was there, she never left her side for more than a few minutes. They were like virtual Siamese twins, talking conspiratorially, laughing at inside jokes, and openly gossiping about friends and relatives. And because she and her husband lived 15 minutes away from us, we spent a lot of time together. That's fine, I think, and perhaps it was jealousy, but while she was with Olivia, she was not truly with me, and it was quite unpleasant. Olivia's spouse did not make matters any better. He was a tall, fair-haired, attractive man named Ethan, friendly, easygoing, and in my opinion, not that smart. He took over his family's furniture store in a nearby town, which became his favorite and occasionally only topic of conversation. He spoke about the store as if it were Microsoft and he was Steve Jobs, boasting about how wonderfully it was run and how no one else in the furniture industry knew what they were doing. The difficulty with this viewpoint was that the store was struggling, and I was confident that anyone who knew anything about business would recognize Ethan as a contributing factor. But I wanted peace and happiness for Sophia, which included not causing problems with her family, so I spent more than one evening simply nodding my head while listening to Ethan continue. We had been married nearly 2 years when Sophia initially requested me to assist Olivia and Ethan. She had planned a wonderful meal, complete with candles and music to set the mood. and she was dressed in a way that promised a relaxing night in bed. So, like a normal new spouse, I assumed she was only interested in having a fantastic roll in the hay with me. But as the evening progressed, it became evident that she had her own ideas. She continued to express how fortunate we were to have such a large salary and how she felt we were in an excellent position to aid others. Then, with an expression of practical sadness, she revealed that she was concerned about Olivia and Ethan's ability to get by. It turned out that Ethan owed a specific amount of money and was having problems making payments. Without assistance, he would be unable to complete his inventory list. I instantly saw where this was going and got right to work. How much do they need? She paused and raised her eyebrows, indicating that I had misunderstood her plan. She nibbled her lip, considered for a moment, and then looked shyly into my eyes. He needs either 50 or 60,000. This will give them freedom and confidence. I nearly choked. Yes, we were doing well, but the majority of my money was held in a family trust, and that sum would have made a significant dent in our existing cash. I knew I could pull the money out of the trust if I absolutely needed it, but I didn't want to explain it to our chief business attorney and trust administrator. He would do what I asked, but I knew that, for the foreseeable future, he would be arguing with me to get the money back. He was not cruel, he simply took his responsibility to protect the trust funds and the business extremely seriously. As I thought about it, it was the only time in our marriage that I attempted to dismiss Sophia's serious request. I don't know, Sophia. That is a lot of money. She frowned. Olivia claims he has some amazing ideas and that they would repay the money straight immediately. If money is your main concern, they make a nice living. I'm certain of it. Well, I wasn't certain about that. In fact, I was certain that sending it to Ethan would result in a large loss of money. But I wanted Sophia to be pleased. So I wrote out a check for 70,000 and informed her that this meant we'd have to save a little money until the money came back. I once heard that if you lend money to a relative, presume you will never see them again. This prepares you emotionally so that the relationship does not suffer if they do not refund the money. So, to my understanding, it was a gift, the 70,000 gift to Sophia's sister and a somewhat inept brother-in-law, which I didn't think would fix the problem because I knew he wasn't a good enough businessman to run his own shop, even with money. I was unhappy, but I wanted to be a decent guy for her and her family. I wanted to please them and was willing to spend 70,000 to do so. 3 to 4 months after I loaned Ethan the money, I was at home looking for a flash disk that had crucial data. I had a poor tendency of leaving critical items in unexpected places, so I almost looted the entire house. After searching all the normal locations, I went into the guest room and looked around the table and under the bed. When I stood up, I observed that it was abnormally lumpy, at least by Sophia's standards, and that there was far more disorder than I was going to make with my little search. It was clear that someone had been lying in it and then hastily pulled up the sheets and blankets without properly preparing it. It didn't seem like a huge thing to me at the time, but later that evening, I unintentionally mentioned it to Sophia. Hey, did anyone sleep in the guest bed? I went there lately, and it was somewhat unkempt. I replied. Sophia started to stutter her response and appeared hot and uncomfortable. Well, I had a nap there earlier. Sorry. I was cleaning and was so exhausted that I immediately hopped into bed with no time to clean anything. At that point in our marriage, I trusted Sophia so much that I couldn't imagine her explanation being anything other than the honest truth. In fact, I remember finding it amusing that she was scared or embarrassed because she needed to take a nap in the middle of the day and that the blanket wasn't the only clue I overlooked. Over the next year or two, a series of bizarre, incomprehensible events occurred that, if I hadn't stuck my head so far up my ass, would have shown Sophia's lack of virtue. For example, I took it for granted that her normally calm job as an assistant manager at a small independent bookshop now forced her to attend a 5 or 6 hour uninterrupted meeting every Friday, a meeting so crucial that I shouldn't have attempted to contact her at the time. I also accepted any explanations for the little bruises that appeared on her body, some of them in rather private areas, or the undies in the laundry that I couldn't recall her wearing. And then there was the story about orange juice. Sophia began shopping at a new high-end grocery store, which wasn't too bad, except that she couldn't get many of the goods they wanted, including my favorite brand of orange juice. I objected about it and advised her to switch stores, but she argued that the new store was better and more convenient for her because it was immediately on her way home from Friday meetings. Her grocery shopping habits may not appear to be a strong indicator that she was cheating, but the knowledge was what finally prompted me to stop and reflect, leading to the epiphany that crushed my heart. Less than 3 years after the first loan, Sophia hinted that Ethan and Olivia would require further funds. By that point, he had not repaid even a portion of the original $70,000, and I didn't want to pay any more money, especially to support an enterprise that I felt was unsustainable. So I declined Sophia's offer, hoping she would get the idea and stop asking. But she persisted, warning Olivia and Ethan that if they didn't improve and buy more goods, they might lose business. Still trying to be Mr. Popular, I felt unable to say no openly, so I eventually agreed to see Ethan's business plan and tour the store to see what he intended to do. I was hoping Sophia would back off if I proved that this was a bad investment. I met Ethan in his business on Tuesday morning, and he walked me around, showed me the floor plan, introduced me to the staff, grinned, and patted me on the back as if we were the best of friends. When we stopped to talk to someone, he spoke about his business strategy with tremendous confidence, almost insincerity, stating his belief that with a little more money to boost inventory and make a few renovations, the store would immediately turn a substantial profit. Ethan and I sat in his office for half an hour, and I expressed my concerns as delicately as possible. I told him that I thought the company had some serious problems. I hinted that unless he could optimize and reduce expenses and pricing, he was unlikely to grow client interest and revenue, even with the improvements he intended to make. I even gently recommended that he consider selling the business and pursuing other work, but he was insulted and insisted that a facelift was all that was required to rectify the situation. I didn't have the heart to turn down his request for money, so I explained that I didn't have enough personal funds to grant him a substantial loan and that it would have to come from a trust. I told him I would go back and speak with our business attorney to see if he could clear the way for the loan, but I couldn't guarantee anything. My strategy was to minimize controversy and make it appear as if I was making a genuine attempt to acquire him money before breaking the bad news and blaming the attorney for turning him down. I realized it was cowardly, but I wanted to retain the harmony in the family and didn't want to lose so much money. In reality, our attorney would do nearly anything I requested him to do, but I always made it clear to everyone I knew that he needed to maintain strict control over the trust and that I couldn't override his judgments. It may seem unjust to make the attorney the evil guy, but to be honest, I believe he relished the job and never complained to me about it. At the end of the conversation, Ethan nodded and smiled confidently, indicating that he believed he would receive credit. He shook my hand firmly and stroked my back again, making me feel even more awful as I walked away. I drove away from the parking lot and along the highway, thinking about meeting Ethan and attempting to mentally clear myself of the sins of timidity and borderline dishonesty that I had committed in his business. I was driving along, not paying much attention to my surroundings, when I noticed something that initially appeared to be an odd coincidence, but then evolved into a vague, troubling notion. It was a smaller grocery store than most larger chains, painted green, and featuring a giant Belmont sign. It appeared so strange that I was certain I had never seen anything like it before, but the name reminded me of something, and I couldn't figure out why. I thought about this for a few minutes before it dawned on me. The store was named Belmont. Sophia began shopping at a supermarket that did not offer my favorite orange juice but was much closer to home. However, this store was not near her workplace, our home, or anywhere else it made sense for her to be throughout the week. Thus, it didn't make sense that this store was convenient for her Friday activities unless, of course, she did it inside a furniture store. Thinking about it, some unpleasant possibilities began to emerge. I did a U-turn, drove past Belmont's, and returned to Ethan's furniture store to sit in his parking lot for a few minutes. I took out my phone and checked to see whether this was the only Belmont store in Brookdale, then spent 15 or 20 minutes considering all of the reasons she may shop there. I examined the possibility that Sophia had another office in the neighborhood, met Olivia for lunch, or frequented a health facility or something nearby. However, my mind kept leading me back to a conclusion I didn't want to face. I suddenly felt compelled to seek out more facts and confront Ethan directly. I got out of the car and hurried quickly to the front entrance of the furniture store, where I observed the clock written on the glass stated that the store was open until late on weekdays except for Fridays when it closed at noon. The cancer of suspicion that had appeared a few minutes ago continued to develop. After slamming the door, I entered the business and approached the first employee I noticed, an awkward middle-aged man preparing coffee. "I apologize, but I'm going to take a break right now," he interrupted angrily. "I don't want to take up your time, but I have an urgent need to speak with Ethan Stevens. I've discussed some serious financial difficulties with him and need additional information," I remarked, staring at him expectantly. But he kept stirring his coffee and even took a drink, not paying attention to my demands. One of the reasons why they couldn't promote the product became clear, and I waited a moment in startled quiet before saying again, this time with a more urgent tone, "This is quite crucial. Could you please phone him for me?" He looked at me strangely at first, but then he recognized me. "You are the person who was here earlier with Ethan, correct?" "Hey, yes, come in. Ethan is currently meeting with the supplier, but you can wait for him in the break room if you choose. I don't think he'll stay around for long, maybe a half-hour maximum." He carefully led me back into the room, leaving me with a cup of coffee and the TV remote. I had a hastily devised strategy that comprised confronting Ethan Hedon and making a few bluffs about how I possessed hard evidence that he and Sophia were cheating. I threatened that if he didn't confess right away, the evidence would reach Olivia and the rest of the family. I resolved that if Ethan cheated on her, he would go immediately, and if not, I'd have to live with the embarrassment. Maybe he'll make a joke about it or something, I believed. I was walking around the room, rehearsing the speech in my brain, considering how I would imply that I had images or film or even claim Sophia had admitted to the affair. Thinking about the forthcoming confrontation, I started looking around the room without thinking. I scoured periodicals and watched a few TV shows before deciding to look around for clues. It finally dawned on me that if they were exploiting the business to defraud people, it was most likely happening in this break room, and if they were doing it here, they were most likely utilizing the beat-up couch I had been staring at for a minute or two. I considered the sofa with wrath and trepidation. It had a faded green color with a few coffee stains and a tear in the material. One of the armrests had obviously seen better days. It would definitely fit better in a junkyard or a second-hand store. I lifted the cushion, and my pulse quickened slightly. I observed that it was a full-sized bed with linens on it. I quickly checked that Ethan was still in his office before pulling out the bed. The linens were soiled and wrinkled, with a couple of slightly darker yellowed patches where a wet spot after sex would be expected. There appeared to be a lipstick smear or two on the bed, and it smelled strongly of perfume. When I opened the bed, I noticed some debris on the floor under the sofa, so I stretched my right hand into the space above the bed to reach the soiled carpet below, pulling up each item one at a time. In the end, I found a pen, a broken coffee cup, an empty tube of KY gel, and a restaurant receipt. Sophia enjoyed eating at a Mexican restaurant, and the check had her trademark smooth, elegant, and incriminating style. Even looking back, I recognized that the check was really fragile circumstantial evidence that could be readily explained away by any number of stories or explanations. But finding it made me feel lighter. The final notion from my thoughts, together with the minor inconveniences of her Friday appointment schedule, bruises, the use of underwear, and the disarray in her bed, painted a clear image of a cheating wife and a shady brother-in-law. My attempt to terrify Ethan into confessing felt like a poor idea. I wanted clear evidence of betrayal, and I was aware that confrontation could cancel everything or make it hard to establish. But now that I knew when and where the betrayal was most likely to occur, I could almost certainly obtain the necessary knowledge and evidence. I folded the bed and sat down on the sofa, tightening my teeth and feeling my heart pound. I've been duped in a few business transactions, and I recall once getting duped at cards, but I've never felt anything like such betrayal in my life. I was about to shout, cry, yell, and pound the wall all at once. However, one burning urge emerged from this inner whirlpool, the desire to get even. I calmed myself a little and began to consider my situation, trying to consider as objectively and unemotionally as possible. I considered Ethan and my wife's vulnerabilities and how I could exploit them to satisfy my wounded ego. When I had solid evidence, my immediate fantasy was to beat the crap out of Ethan, but I simply interpreted that as a prison sentence. My second thought was to deny the loan and demand that all outstanding funds be refunded to me immediately, but I remembered what our attorney had advised me when I was pursuing borrowing from a particularly pushy bank. He warned against it, adding that if you owe someone money, especially someone who isn't looking out for your best interests, they have you by the balls. I wanted to take Ethan by the balls. Looking back inside Ethan's office, I noticed him standing and shaking hands with the supplier. I waved and grinned. He waved back, led the supplier to the door, and dashed back to the break room. "Hey, Michael, did you forget anything? Need more information?" I shook my head, smiling. "Listen, Ethan, I thought about it, and I believe I may have made the wrong impression today. I hope you understand. I think you're a fantastic businessman, and I believe you have a real chance to succeed with the store. However, as I was leaving, I realized that I may have misunderstood when I inquired about your plans in case things did not go as planned." He smiled back. "No, Michael, I've got it. A good businessman asks uncomfortable questions." "Great, great. I just wanted to let you know that I really enjoy what you're doing here. Besides, you're a family member, and I have to believe this isn't simply a sick investment. It is the best move you can make as a friend, family member, and businessman. So I didn't want you to go home without knowing that I was going to work hard to obtain this money for you. I can't imagine we won't get it. As previously said, I do not have a large amount of money in my own accounts, so I must request a trust fund withdrawal. But honestly, I believe I can persuade our attorney to give in, and we will collect the money for you." Ethan listened with an expectant grin on his face, which became whiter as I spoke. "Man, that sounds fantastic. I'm telling you, this business is about to take off, so this loan is equally safe with me as it is with the bank. You have absolutely no need to be concerned." "I am not worried at all, Ethan. Of course, our attorney will have to reach some sort of deal because he insists on preserving the trust with collateral and whatnot. If you are okay with this, I can get everything signed within a few days. I believe you will receive the money within a week." The following morning, I entered our attorney's office, closed the door, and sat down in a chair. He was talking on the phone, taking notes, and raising one finger to indicate that he would soon be able to speak. I was visibly twitching as he ended the call, and he apparently noticed because after hanging up, he looked at me in astonishment and asked, "So, Michael, what made you so nervous this morning?" I cleared my throat and leaned forward slightly to speak. "I believe you'll need access to a trust to obtain a substantial loan." "Yes, I believe this should not be an issue. What kind of loan and how much?" He turned on the computer with his mouse and clicked a few icons to launch a spreadsheet that detailed the trust fund information. I cleared my throat again and leaned in closer. "Look, before we begin filling out the paperwork, the first thing I need from you is complete confidentiality. I always know. Listen, I want you to understand that this is rare, and it may be tempting to speak with coworkers or family members. I don't want anyone except you and me to comprehend what I'm trying to do here." He shuffled in his chair, wrinkled his brow, and after a brief pause, began to respond. "Michael, if this is illegal, it is not illegal, not at all. What I actually want you to do is create a document that represents the peak of sound legality." He shook his head, so I continued. "I'd like to borrow some money and have you draw out loan documentation. I want the loan terms to be absolutely explicit. I want the loan to be appropriately collateralized by the firm for which I intend to grant it, and the penalty for non-payment to be very clearly defined. It sounds like you are expecting a default. It's almost as if you want to draw the guy into a trap. So who are you trying to trap and why?" I paused for a while before responding, then looked him directly in the eyes. "I intend to capture my brother-in-law, Ethan. The reason is Sophia." He raised his eyebrows in amazement, opened his mouth many times to respond but never said anything. Finally, he sipped from a glass of water on the table and asked anxiously, "Are you sure about this?" "Very," I responded. Within a week, the document was prepared, and I personally delivered it to Ethan for his perusal and signature. He requested his lawyer, a tiny muscular man named Daniel, who also happened to be his cousin, to meet with us and go over the document. "Okay, sir," I started. "Daniel, I looked at it last night, and it pretty much matches my expectations for a company loan. But Ethan, there are a few things I'd like to point out before you sign." "Okay," Ethan gave his normal polite smile. "Sure, give me the details." Daniel cleared his throat and stared intently at Ethan. I felt I saw contempt in his eyes, as if he knew how little Ethan knew about operating a business. Okay, first thing, the $475,000 loan will be repaid over 7 years. You've got a fairly standard rate here. Payments will begin immediately, totaling a little more than $6,000 per month. Ethan nodded. The real amount you will receive will be only $365,000 because we are combining it with your loan from a few years ago. Michael will receive $70,000, and you will receive the remainder. Is it clear? I see, Ethan said smugly with a faint accent. Daniel looked at him again and spoke quietly. Okay, now the loan is secured by collateral. It is related to both your business and the property above. Kayak, is this where they hunt ducks? Yes, Ethan gestured to our attorney while speaking with Daniel. They wish to protect Michael's trust in the event that the business fails. He winced briefly before hastily adding, but that will not happen. The business is in terrific shape. I believe so. Our attorney seemed to think so, and Michael absolutely believed so. Seriously, Michael? Yes, I responded with as much excitement as possible. Ethan showed me the books, and I believe he has a winner here. I grinned. Though I'm not sure if you know, but our attorney is quite conservative and constantly analyzes the worst-case situation. He wants to be certain that the trust is protected, so it is critical to him that if the business collapses for some inexplicable cause, there is something to recompense the trust. Daniel frowned, then stared at Ethan. Do you understand that if you default, you risk losing the business transferred to the trust, as well as land for duck hunting? This has been in our family for a very long time. Certainly, Ethan spoke sincerely, maybe to demonstrate to Daniel that he understood and took the warning seriously. I understand the consequences. Still would, but to be honest, I am quite confident in the business, and I believe that taking out this loan is far safer than trying to run it without it. Do you understand that fines start accruing 3 months after an insufficient payment? Right. I fully understand. He smiled at me as if we shared a secret, as if he knew I would never let our attorney apply punitive fines for anything other than the most heinous offenses. I simply smiled back. At home, Sophia was overjoyed. She went on and on about how Ethan's business would thrive now that he had enough money to address his key issues. I somehow managed not to say what I actually wanted to say, which was that Ethan was the major problem and no amount of money would address it. But for the next 2 weeks, keeping my mouth shut regarding Ethan's commercial ability was the easiest thing I could do around Sophia. I needed more knowledge to end my marriage the way I intended, and it would take some time. So, I knew I'd have to control my emotions, which ranged from melancholy to wrath and disgust whenever I thought of her deception. Having supper with her without erupting became a challenge, and sex was avoided whenever possible. And since I had no doubt, I was forced to rely on memories of a fairly nasty sexual event from many years before. When I was 18, my buddies and I traveled to Los Angeles for spring break. We spent one night in Cancun to unwind. We drank, watched some extremely explicit and frankly gut-wrenching sex shows, and came away with a few. I somehow ended up paired with a woman in her 30s who had obviously had a difficult life. She was not particularly attractive, and she may have been much less appealing than I recall, given that my perception of aesthetic attractiveness was obviously influenced by a high blood alcohol level. Even in this state, I had severe reservations about taking her to bed, and I began to make excuses to get out. But my buddies hounded me, questioning my manhood, sexual orientation, and everything else, making me feel as if I had no choice. I hurriedly faked a smile, drank a few more drinks, gritted my teeth, and followed her into the damp, filthy private room above the bar to get down to work. Now, in order to get the job done, I realized I had to pretend she wasn't there, that she was just a sexual device. I ended up treating her as a piece of meat, having her and enjoying her despite the noise from the bar, the cramped quarters, the unclean linens, and the foul odors she let off. So, during the next 3 weeks when I had sex with Sophia, she returned to that image in my mind. I closed my eyes, pressed my emotions aside, and hugged her as I had that unfortunate Mexican girl all those years before. Nothing soft or affectionate, only a biological function. Once I started, it was almost too simple to have her as hard and fast as I could. I was quite harsh with my method. Unsurprisingly, Sophia noticed the differences and eventually mentioned them. She lamented that she hoped she could have had some gentle, romantic sex when we got into bed. However, she did not appear to dislike how we had it and pondered it. Which is a step up from the sex we had previously had. In another life, I believe she would have made a lot of money off American tourists visiting Cancun. Obtaining conclusive evidence of an affair turned out to be about as simple as I expected. Ethan utilized some of the money to renovate the business, and throughout the day, there were several workmen completing repairs. I correctly predicted that the electrician, who had $1,500 in his back pocket, would install a camera and recording device in one of the light fittings. On a Tuesday morning, around a month after Ethan received the money, over the sofa in the living room. In 2 days, he had everything cleaned up. I now had a good notion of what Ethan and Sophia were up to, so I believed I was ready for what I'd see through the webcam. I decided to sit in my office at work with a drink and some chips and take everything in as objectively as possible, as if I were watching a film. It turns out that seeing your wife have sex with another man is far worse than simply realizing it is happening much worse. By the end of the recording, I had consumed so much scotch that I couldn't make it home. My desk vomited twice and tossed a paperweight at my office door. The details are mostly what you'd anticipate. On Tuesday, I got at the beginning of the day and began looking around quickly until I noticed a woman in a blue dress enter the room with a large shopping bag, take fresh sheets from the bag, and spread them down on the sofa. I instantly reduced the recording to regular speed and confirmed grimly that the woman was Sophia. After changing the linens, she opened the bag again and pulled out a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. She removed her blue dress, folded it neatly, and placed it in her luggage before waiting on the edge of the bed, wearing thigh-high stockings, French-cut underwear, and a very revealing bra while reading a novel. It was oddly bizarre, reminiscent of a strange performance art exhibition I once witnessed in New York, in which a scantily clothed young woman read strange New Age poetry to an audience more interested in her breasts than the poetry. Ethan eventually entered the room. Sophia sat down her book, smiled, and stood up to hug him. Then she pulled him away, slightly reprimanding him for keeping her waiting for his arrival. He said that her problem was that she couldn't wait for him to come in. They both laughed at the old joke. They kissed for a few minutes before Sophia grabbed for his belt and unfastened his pants, pulling them down around his ankles along with his underwear. The sex I witnessed was not extraordinary. I got the impression that this was their routine, as they quietly changed each step, expecting what the next step would be. Sex was intriguing. He had a difficult time using a consistent rhythm, like a metronome, which I would have found uninteresting if I hadn't been upset. Around the 10-minute mark, Ethan climaxed, and I had the impression Sophia was doing the same, judging by the way she quickly extended out her legs and drew her head back. They laid there in silence for a few moments before he moved onto his side, and they started kissing. By the time they were done, I was so hurt and angry. I knew the images I had seen were engraved on my awareness like an indelible scar that could never be removed, and hence, I would be unable to forgive either of these 2 traitors. And I was delighted I had a plan to end, rather than save, my marriage. As I moved forward to turn off the video, I realized they had begun conversing in bed. Sophia laid on her side with her head elevated, resting her right hand on her right elbow and drawing designs on Ethan's chest. They exchanged glances, murmured softly, and smiled with satisfaction. Sophia discreetly complained about having to use the furniture business as a love nest. Ethan turned on his side and responded, "Come on, if we use the hotel we will undoubtedly leave marks. We almost got caught utilizing one of our houses. We really have no option." Sophia shrugged. "Yes, I understand, but I wish we had another area to play. I don't like this room. Changing last week's soiled sheets to make love does not excite me." Ethan stretched out and stroked her face while smiling. "We could always run away together." Sophia chuckled in response, and Ethan's demeanor became contemplative, his smile fading somewhat. "Seriously, Sophia, have you ever regretted marrying Michael? I mean, I adore Olivia, and she's a good wife, but am wondering if you think it would be better if you and I married instead of them." Sophia sat up on the bed, practically sitting with her back against the back of the sofa and her arms wrapped around her knees, which were drawn to her chest. She looked at Ethan before responding. Come on. How many times shall we do this? Well, we've got something pretty special, but no, I don't believe it would be better if we married. Of course, we'd be quite happy together. But I also love Michael, and you adore Olivia. If you and I were together, we would be alone. Michael is a highly monogamous person, and he would never seek a relationship with me if I was married. And I doubt Olivia would be pleased with that either. She leaned forward and kissed Ethan's cheek, caressing his chest with her left hand. The reality is, folks like you and me have a wonderful gift, love. We can love more than one person at once. We must love more than one person. This is perfect for us, but Olivia and Michael aren't like that. Their self-control inclinations ensure that they will never be able to do what you and I can. They will never be able to keep their emotions under control and make everyone pleased. Hearing this, my rage boiled over, and I sent my documents through the office door. Because I adored her, perhaps she was the only lady who ever loved me. I had no idea how arrogant, delusional, and narcissistic my wife was. In her mind, she transformed her infidelities into some sort of virtue for herself. Obviously, this was not an act that was a stab in the back of her life or marriage, but rather one that enhanced the love in the world, which she not only had a right to but also a moral obligation. I slept on the couch in my office that night and finished all of the paperwork. When I arrived home the following evening, Sophia welcomed me with her hands on her hips and a sour scowl. "Where the hell were you last night?" I was quite worried. "You did not call, you did not write, you didn't give me any idea." "What the hell?" I stopped her with a raised hand. "Yesterday evening I was at work. I got intoxicated and couldn't go home, so I stayed there." She looked at me in full confusion. "Wait, what? Were you drinking at work?" I smiled and nodded at her. She continued, "At the very least, you could tell me what is going on." I almost phoned the cops. "And why in the heck were you drinking at work?" She was still looking at me, but her inquiry was utterly perplexed. Without saying anything, I moved past her into the living room, sat down on the sofa, placed my feet on the coffee table, took the briefcase in my lap, and opened it. Sophia let out an angry sigh as she followed me into the living room and sat down in a chair opposite the sofa. "How about some answers, Michael? Why did you drink so much at work? What happened last night? What's happening?" I continued to rummage through my case, pulling out a few folders and placing them one by one on the couch next to me. "Just a second, Sophia. I'd like to straighten things up a little." I looked at the documents a little more. I removed my legs from the table, replaced them with papers, and leaned forward. I rubbed my hands together, expecting a delicious lunch. I grinned as I looked at Sophia. "Okay then, let us get started." "What? Let we begin?" "Okay, well, after what happened last night." "What about last night? What happened last night?" Sophia's confrontational demeanor soon gave way to something more docile. "When I came home, I started to feel a little scared. Could you please tell me what you did last night?" "Yeah, I watched the video." "Did you watch the video?" "Yeah, I saw the film of you and Ethan having sex on the couch in the lounge and found it upsetting. So perhaps I went a little overboard. Do you understand?" I smiled, weakly, emotionless, looking at Sophia's expression, which ranged from surprise to shock to scared confusion. Her lips were partly open, with tiny spasmodic movements that barely opened and closed, unable to make a single meaningful sound. Her eyes raced back and forth from the papers on the table to the door and to me, as if she expected someone or something to walk through the door, put the papers away, and everything would be well. Eventually, she spoke. I do not comprehend, Michael. What exactly are you talking about?" "Come on, Sophia. You cannot be that foolish. I'm referring to you and Ethan and what you did yesterday and every other Friday for a year." I gestured at the papers in front of me. "I am talking about the end of our marriage." Sophia gasped and briefly covered her mouth. I waited for her to respond. "Michael, we can work it out. I guess I can help you understand." "I believe I understand, love." I took a DVD from my briefcase, held it in my palms, and then pushed it over the table to her. "Last night, I got a lot of information to assist me in understanding. Indeed, a veritable goldmine of new information about my adoring wife and pleasant brother-in-law." She stared at the DVD like it was a dangerous snake, recoiling slightly but making no attempt to hold it. Come on, Sophia. This is your copy. I won't tell you how I acquired it, but I have mine for future reference to expand on your idea of love and dedication. She leaned forward and began to stand up, and for a second it appeared like she was going to approach me, but I raised my hand to stop her. She sat down. She bit her lips for a second, and then, gazing directly at me, she spoke slowly and methodically, with a fake confidence that I suspected was intended to conceal the quivering in her voice. Michael, please listen. You must open your mind and think about this. There is no use in destroying your life or our lives because our ideals and talents differ. I love you, and I've always been willing to accommodate our differences. I hope. I interrupted her with a faux snort. Diverse ideals and talents? Seriously? Do you believe cheating on your husband is a talent? Because honestly, Sophia, I believe everyone is capable of this. Seriously, talent is not the appropriate word. She took a long breath, then looked up at the ceiling before returning her gaze to me. Ability. I believe the correct word is ability. I have a bigger capacity for laughter, and I can and have successfully loved more than one person at once. Aside from archaic ideals about love and relationships, there are no reasons why I cannot or should not use my skills. Please just quit. You're only aggravating me with your excuses. I understand that you believe you have a special capacity that allows you to deceive, lie, and cheat when you should be faithful. But that's only Sophia's excuse. Anyone can have romantic relationships with numerous persons at the same time. This does not qualify them as lovers with exceptional ability. It simply makes them cheaters. Within the blink of an eye, the apologetic, conciliatory Sophia was gone, replaced by an angry, aggressive, and overconfident Vixen. Are you saying I'm a cheater? She attacked me. Okay, fair enough. It's most likely true from your perspective. But again, I never lost or stifled my love for you or Ethan. So I never violated my emotions or compromised my feelings as a result of some archaic code that requires me to limit my relationship to one person and one person only. So, while I may appear to be a cheater to you, I am perfectly content with what I see in the mirror. I have no doubts about what I did. None. She was breathing heavily and fiercely, her cheeks and chest flushed, her eyes full of fire, a gaze that made me challenge her, and I quit. Would you prefer to live like this? Some kind of open relationship with a variety of guys, loving one guy one day, then another the next? Yes, please, to each his own, but claiming you didn't cheat or were dishonest is complete crap because you never told me you had sex with Ethan, and you know I wouldn't do it. You know what she felt. My fire and leaned aside slightly to avoid my gaze, but I twisted so that my gaze fell on hers and then continued. So, you choose to lie by omission, the greatest omission of truth I have ever witnessed. You convinced me and almost everyone else that we were a relationship, a pair who was completely committed to each other. But you went ahead and started or continued to keep Ethan's inexpensive adventures in the furniture store hidden as best you could. You've told falsehoods and lived lies regardless of the consequences. You have an unusual family philosophy that makes you a cheater. By this point, she had angry tears pouring down her cheeks and her mouth was tightly clenched, more angry than sad, slowly shaking her head in disagreement with what I said, but seemingly unable to express her sentiments. I kept looking at her, hoping for an answer, but when nothing came, I ended the confrontation by pushing the papers closer to her. Read it. Find an attorney. This is correct. Eventually, she spoke. What if I do not want a divorce? Then you're out of luck because you'll receive it. I stopped for a moment before adding, with a barely hidden grin, but that does not imply you will be alone. I moved out that evening into an apartment closer to work and rapidly returned to my old self. Sophia was a worker, a businessman, and a loner who did not have the time or willingness to participate in social events. My working hours were increasingly brutal. One person observed this, but I knew that if I sat at home, I would obsess over Sophia indefinitely, replaying her anxiety in my head, wondering if she was thinking about me or if she was having sex with Ethan. I had no alternative except to work hard and try to forget about my marriage as soon as possible. My natural instinct in any form of competition is to do whatever it takes to win, and I suspect that most individuals who know me in business would anticipate lengthy, aggressive talks to reach an agreement. But it would have resulted in delays, interaction, and discomfort, and I was willing to pay to get out of the situation fast and cleanly. I offered Sophia a substantial lump amount in exchange for continuous assistance, threatening to remove the offer if she did not agree to a fast divorce. Deep down, I believe I wanted her to object so that I could insist on making the marriage work, to reject the proposal and fight for the marriage. I wanted whatever chance I had of surviving. She believed her marriage had to be more important to her than money. Turns out that this was not true. With some half-serious arguments, she agreed to the requirements, and my marriage ended within 60 days. Ethan began to fall behind on payments a few months after the divorce was finalized, as one might expect. Our attorney issued adequate cautions in an unpleasant letter, informing him that we would begin to take the money in any way possible. He called and emailed with excuses and promises, almost pleading for more time to pay. I told our attorney to play hardball and made it plain that we would exercise our rights and seek bail as soon as legally possible. On the eve of the detention, Ethan pleaded to meet with me in person, which I granted. At that point, I recognized he was desperate and willing to do anything, including taking money from anyone, to save himself from the wolves. I wanted the money to come from Sophia. I was looking forward to the meeting. We met at my office after work. Most of the secretaries had gone home, but Rachel, my personal assistant, stayed in the outer office, ready to produce papers if necessary. Ethan was more nervous than I had ever seen him before, holding out his sweat-soaked hand for me to shake as he went nervously into my office. Sophia stood behind him almost timidly, and seeing her made it difficult for me to catch my breath. Sophia sat closer to me than Ethan. She wore one of my favorite dresses. She was completely made up and flashing her blazing smile, and I had no doubt that she was trying to help Ethan's chances by tapping into my emotional connections. I instantly had an almost overwhelming want to rush to her, hold her in my arms, and kiss her. But seeing the risk to my sentiments, I furiously controlled this instinct, drawing a melancholy expression on my face and murmuring some sort of greeting and hesitant awareness of her existence. To be honest, I was astonished she came at all. I had been looking forward to this meeting for a long time and had carefully planned how it would go. I had not anticipated Sophia to be there, and I was concerned that her presence might interfere with my strategy to identify her with her lover's failings. I considered resisting, perhaps requesting that she wait outside, but eventually decided that her presence would make the outcome more pleasant. Ethan began by attempting to turn me. After shaking my hand, he grinned as wide as he could and began making small talk about his desire to set things right. He wanted me to be happy and hoped I understood how much he valued me and how sad he was that things had turned out this way. I was surprised that he seemed to want to rekindle our friendship and thought we could be buddies again. I didn't buy that. Without smiling, I glanced at him and halted his little statement as dramatically as possible. Ethan, please stop this nonsense. Your apologies are meaningless to me, okay? He swayed in his chair like if ID struck him. Then he pursed his lips, took a deep breath through his nostrils, and nodded in agreement before starting over. Okay, apologies, Michael. Let us get down to business. He stared at me as if this was my meeting and that I should continue, but I merely extended my arms up in an expected posture, waiting for him to explain his case. He lowered his lips uncomfortably and ran a quivering hand through his hair before explaining that he had every intention of returning the money but was now short on funds. He mentioned how our attorney plays hardball and expressed uncertainty, knowing how much he was pressuring him to pay. He went on to add that the business was on the verge of recovery and that with a little patience, he would be able to get his head above water. Finally, he tried to convince me that if I gave him more time, I would be in a better financial position. I leaned back in my chair, attentively scrutinizing Ethan's tense smile, the thin film of sweat that had developed on his forehead, and the uncontrolled quivering of his right palm on the table between us. Ethan, if you weren't a flagrant deceiver, I might consider granting you a respite. His eyes widened in surprise and distress, and he leaned forward to complain when he was stopped by a raised hand. Come on, Ethan, you must understand that it is nearly impossible to trust a man who hasn't considered screwing his daughter-in-law. You should understand that asking the woman's spouse for financial assistance is completely ludicrous. Ethan shuffled uneasily in his seat as Sophia hurriedly cleared her throat and spoke in a sorrowful tone. Michael, please, you can't penalize Ethan simply because I can do whatever the hell I want. I snapped at Sophia, giving her a hostile look. Why are you here? I thought I might be able to persuade you to do it for old time's sake. I still worry about you, and I interrupted her abruptly and rudely. You had an incorrect thought. Honestly, your presence reminds me of how Ethan knew both figuratively and physically. So do yourself and Ethan a favor by sitting back, trying to appear kind, and keeping comments to a minimum. Her eyes welled up with tears and her chin wrinkled, but she did as I said and sat back peacefully in her chair. I turned back to Ethan. Okay, Ethan, that's how things will be. You will pay the bill on time according to a schedule. I will begin the working off procedure to extract everything possible from the collateral. Ethan shook his head forcefully. Come on, Michael, you cannot take my business from me. You cannot. I can and I will if you do not pay. Ethan, my advice is to get money. Reach out to your family, locate a bank, or sell something. I do not care. Just collect the money. But, however, as you are aware, banks do not lend to me. Otherwise, I would have turned to them first when I couldn't help. They don't have that much money. I stared Ethan directly in the eyes. Don't tell me that your family doesn't have money. I know they do. No, oh no, they would help if they could. But they simply cannot. How about her? I pointed a finger at Sophia. Have you asked her for money? Ethan sat back down. Sophia doesn't. I laughed. Of course I did. I wrote her a check for $170,000. She has a lot of money. Really? Sophia smirked at me, and Ethan asked her a question, implying that he was unaware of the lump sum payment. She felt apprehensive, maybe a bit nauseated. Yes, I have it, but I need the money. I laughed again. Stop, Sophia. When you originally convinced me to support Ethan, you told me how safe it was to give him money. Why are you hesitant now? Don't you believe Ethan can get his business back on track? Don't you want to assist? Convince me that he's worth the money. If you believe this is a worthwhile investment for me, why not for you? I gave her an ugly grin. She gulped hard, briefly glanced at Ethan, and then returned her gaze to me. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and said in a slightly defiant tone that she would make up the gap for a while. Ethan grinned at her. She returned a feeble smile, and they walked away. Ethan walked with confidence, while Sophia walked with disappointment. As they held the door open for them, I left them with one final command. Remember, Ethan, I don't care how. I only need money. You will receive your money, he spit back at me. Sophia appeared worried. Over the following couple of months, I continued to seek refuge in my work, businesslike and inefficient with everyone. I proceeded to avoid intimate conversations at all costs, rejecting any social possibilities and preferring to work or be alone. I tried so hard not to think about my wife's infidelity, but everything reminded me of her. Of course, Ethan's monthly check was laying on my desk. The check gave me a horrible sense of satisfaction, as if I had somehow helped to bring the perpetrators of my fortune into poverty. Olivia contacted me, and things got a little worse. She sent me multiple emails and even contacted me on the phone. I was astonished to find that Ethan and Sophia had revealed to her, albeit in a mild version of their affair, and that she had taken it hard at first but had eventually forgiven them both. To my disappointment and terror, she faintly intimated that she suspected they were lovers and had reached an agreement in which Ethan and Sophia continued to see each other. She even made a half-hearted effort to persuade me to consider getting Sophia back. My comments were caustic and cruel, and I was confident that by the end of the second call, I had left her in tears. Following that, I never heard from her again. Olivia's obvious tolerance made it clear that the emotional cost Ethan and Sophia incurred was much lower than I had anticipated. Now I was terrified that the story would end, that Ethan would pay off his debt, that he would pay off Sophia, and that they would all be pleased with the outcome, both financially and emotionally, and that they would leave me behind, shaking their heads at the poor soul who couldn't understand what modern love was. I should not have bothered. The furniture showroom burned down 9 months after I met Ethan and Sophia. It was a stunning 2-alarm fire that threatened numerous surrounding structures and made nightly headlines. I didn't see the storyline, but our attorney did, and he called me right away to discuss the consequences. He was unhappy with me for taking such a risk, since he was certain that the trust had flushed a huge sum of money down the toilet. I calmed him by offering to personally purchase the debt if he defaulted, assuring him that the property itself was valuable solely because of its position. Obvious doubts were raised about the fire, and when catalysts were discovered, the insurance company refused to pay. With no income from the store, Ethan defaulted on the debt, and I bought the burning wreckage of the property, as well as 35 acres of Georgia duck hunting territory. The criminal inquiry took nearly 6 months. The police put together a strong circumstantial case against Ethan and Sophia. They were able to demonstrate that the store was losing money, and Sophia was spending more and more money each month to keep it open. Ethan made repeated frantic attempts to acquire funds from other sources, all of which failed before secretly selling the business. But there were no purchasers, even at a significantly discounted price. Investigators discovered no proof that Sophia or Ethan were present in the store on the night of the fire, or that they purchased anything to start or precipitate it. However, their case was based on the assumption that they hired a professional to set the store on fire. They discovered multiple searches for the term arson on Sophia's personal computer, phone records indicating interactions with at least 2 males with arson convictions, and evidence that she had withdrawn $135,000 in cash the week before the fire. Sophia and Ethan had a decent lawyer, who she most likely paid for with whatever money she had left, and the district attorney knew he was going to fight, so he began making agreements. I believe they began with first-degree arson and fraud charges and progressed from there. The defense refused to settle for anything less than 4th-degree arson, so a game of tag began to determine a trial date. On the first day of the trial, I was on the witness list, waiting outside in the lobby on a hard wooden bench. I was reading the newspaper and tapping my foot on the tile floor when a court official came out and stated that the trial had been canceled, that they had finally reached an agreement, and that we could all go home. I began packing my belongings to leave. Sophia and Ethan entered from the hallway, accompanied by many officers and their lawyer. Several reporters jumped up and pushed microphones under their noses, but they refused to comment. The reporters turned to their lawyer. Ethan met with Olivia and exited the foyer with many officers, but Sophia looked my way and approached me to talk. I must admit that I appreciated her courage in confronting me under those circumstances. "So, Michael, is today your lucky day? Is this what you wanted? Will I be punished for my sins?" I chuckled angrily and shook my head mockingly. "I hope to have a faithful wife in a good marriage. I won't get what I want from you. Absent that, I only want my money," I responded. She snorted. "So you're not getting any of this now, are you? I got some of it back and now have a store." She laughed. "And what will you do about it? Has it quit smoking yet? You'd be surprised what a savvy businessman can do with a decent piece of real estate, even a smoking one." Her nostrils fl-ed, and her face toughened slightly. She took a big breath and then spoke again. "And suddenly you were happy, alone, free of anyone tied to your employment for the foreseeable future." She offered me a knowing smirk. "Do not deny it. I know you. I understand how much you dislike meeting new people. I'm working on it, Sophia. I loved you, but you're not the only lady in the world," I said. She smiled confidently. "No, I'm not the only one, but I don't believe you can find what you businessmen call an equivalent successor. Whether you like it or not, you'll miss me." I leaned towards her and whispered in her ear, "I might be a bit lonely, but you aren't. Will you? The good news is that you'll be sharing a small area with a group of attractive, androgynous women with whom you can share all of your bountiful affection. This will benefit both you and the lesbian community." Sophia astonished me by immediately losing her cool after my last statement, recoiling as if I were radioactive. Her expression was contemptuous, and her eyes were angry. She took a deep breath. Her chest heaved fiercely many times. Then she exploded. "You're sanctimonious, self-centered, and emotionally damaged," she wailed as police hauled her away. "I'm heading toward the door. You will be in the same hall as me, alone with no one, married to my slave. As I saw her shout at me, her love for me completely vanished, leaving only scornful loathing. I was struck by a sudden sense of sadness. I fought the temptation to express my grief, smiled faintly, and murmured some gags about her public usage of harsh language, but she just resumed her rant as if I hadn't said anything. But only a short time will pass until I am released from prison and able to resume my life, and you will remain alone, wishing to be with me. And then, many years later, when you're married to a dull ex-secretary, you'll be sorry you didn't agree. The door closed behind her, abruptly silencing her ranting. I turned and left the courtroom. My day had been freed of judgment, and now, with no meetings or conferences, am fighting with a developing sense of despair and loneliness. I visited the burnt location and reflected on my life. The temperature fell, and the wind continued to whip my jacket and sting my face as I gazed around, still unsure what to do with the wreckage. I wasn't sure if I could even see the situation, and all I wanted to do was sell everything, forget about the loss, and get back to doing what I'd done before. It was safe, maybe even clever, but I knew there was another choice. You might take a risk and rebuild, possibly opening another furniture store. I was considering the potential of effectively selling furniture from the same location where Ethan failed. I was considering making a huge issue out of it, with plenty of advertising, billboards, and possibly even TV advertisements, something Ethan and my ex couldn't miss. I can even call it Sophia's and have plenty of last-minute sales. It seemed to me that the decisions I would make regarding the site were similar to the ones I had unknowingly made about my life in general. Sophia was correct about me. My natural and sole social position prior to meeting her was to retreat, avoid the possibility of closeness, and concentrate on work. I saw myself gradually approaching a life of loneliness, a financially secure but largely unhappy existence. I reverted to doing something safe, such as sitting on the concrete block. I looked around again, still assessing my alternatives and planning my future. I was caught between my anxieties and desires, the ingrained behaviors that served and defined me, and my yearning to change and be unique. I was about to leave and return to work, letting things pass and deferring the decision until another day, when a few rays of late afternoon sun pierced through the clouds between the buildings and illuminated the graffiti-covered wall across the street. The light created a searing orange glow on the wall, giving the concrete and letters an incandescent appearance. The words were written in large white letters that were clear and easy to read. Take action. I've always disliked superstitious people and how they let meaningless, objectively irrelevant things govern their lives as indications or habits, but lying on a concrete slab in November, recalling these words seemed like Fatiha communication from God. I got out my cell phone and contacted the workplace. I'm calling my helper. Hello, Rachel. What is the name of the architecture firm that created the new shopping complex that is making headlines? The one with glass and fountains? Is it Granite Works? Something like that, I believe. She chuckled lightly to herself for a few moments as she checked. Yes, Granite Works. Looks like they're based in Brookdale. Okay. Could you please arrange a meeting with me as soon as possible? Are we building anything? I gazed around the neighborhood, mentally envisioning the new store, and felt a burst of confidence. Yes, I think so. Okay, sure, boss. Anything else? As my gaze rested on the graffiti, I tightened my lip for a brief moment. On the opposite side of the roadway, again reading the imperative act. Yes, Rachel, there is one more thing. Do you remember the representative in the counterfeit jeans? Sarah Green? Is she a tall blonde, I believe? Her tone became more skeptical, and I wondered if she felt I was having a breakdown. Could you give me her phone number? Of course, boss. Do you want me to connect it? No. I will call myself. Thank you. Thanks for watching. What would you do if you discovered such betrayal? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. See you next time.